There's an echo in the canyon, a reflection on the sound.
Come on in, come on in. Welcome again. The Art of Poetry for you. I'm Frank Crowley, glad to be back. Here we are in the beautiful time of September. This is not garlic, it is pumpkin decorations. So, thank you, Victor. Thank you, Bjorn. This is return engagement. So delightful to have you. And also Lori, who will be reading opening poem and closing poem too. So, welcome again. We're happy and jubilant even this very beautiful late summer morning. So, Lori, when you're ready, if you can do a magical trick and come from behind the camera. And thank you for your wonderful voice, who will be sounding like Mary Oliver today.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm so happy you're here.
Me too.
You are an
Glad to be
inspiration
here,
for
too.
me.
And you as well.
Oh, great. And Mary, we discussed, is really a blockbuster in a surprising way with this new poem.
This is a great poem called West Wind. You are young, so you know everything. You leap into the boat and begin rowing. But listen to me, without fanfare, without embarrassment, without any doubt, I talk directly to your soul. Listen to me. Lift the oars from the water. Let your arms rest and your heart's little intelligence, and listen to me. There is life without love. It is not worth a bent penny or a scuffed shoe. It is not worth the body of a dead dog 9 days unburied. When you hear a mile away and still out of sight the churn of the water as it begins to swirl and roil, fretting around the sharp rocks, when you hear that unmistakable pounding, when you feel the mist on your mouth, and sense ahead the embattlement, the long falls plunging and steaming, then row. Row for your life toward it.
Oh, that was so moving. Brilliant reading. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You channeled Mary in a beautiful way. Oh, she's so deep. Bjorn, I often think of your emotions in the show that we had, and also now the emotions that come up when I reread your poems from this marvelous collection. We're back to enjoy that. A beautiful amble. Dear Bjorn.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. I'm glad to be here.
What have you got for us today?
Well, Victor and I were talking a little bit about that poem you just read from Mary Oliver, and Mary Oliver's been an influence on me both as a poet and just as a person. And one of the ones that Victor mentioned to me in connection to this was a poem from that book called The Line, and it's kind of a narrative or a prose poem. And so maybe I'll start with that.
Great.
So The Line. He seemed to lean on a counter of air, a slight bend in his knees, standing at an angle too shallow for sustaining its upright nature. Though his khakis were probably 3 or 4 sizes too big, it was impossible to imagine him otherwise. His button-down draped like the cover of a cheap grill, but with all the elegance of an old cedar. His sandals looked like those a younger man may wear kayaking off Camano Island, with 2 black straps crossing each well-padded foot. and orange and green and pale blue arrows and X's crossing the straps. His long, wispy white hair seemed to connect to his mail-patterned head with all the loyalty of a cottonwood seed in May, and I noticed others noticing his relaxed, upturned mouth, his smiling eyes, his quiet nods to two others queued for their morning fuel to go ahead of him. He was still waiting. And I noticed them wondering what secret he must know or what companion he awaited. And not knowing myself, I too waited and watched from a surprisingly comfortable wood chair in the corner as he let a third and a fourth patron go ahead of him. His hands never left his pockets, allowing a clear view of their distressed, worn entrances, a fifth and a sixth time. I wondered if the wearing was due to rough hands or repeated use or maybe sharp keys, a seventh and an eighth. The same detail appeared on his collar, looking like a plastic bag caught 10 months before on wind-stripped barbed wire, where white stubble, a quarter-inch long, suggested a weekly shaving. A ninth and a tenth. Finally, with no one else to stand behind, he reached the counter and spoke with a resonant, though unexpectedly middle to high-pitched voice that made you wonder if some unseen whale was singing in unison at the frequency of the sound, and he made his order with a smile. The cashier slash barista slash crepe chef gave him his total, and finally he pulled his hands out of his pockets with all the strength and slow unfurling of a great blue heron. Having settled his bill, he walked toward me, which only took 5 steps to do, and suddenly I realized I'd been looking at him too long to remain inconspicuous, and his eyes caught mine, and I was a child caught in the lingerie section of a box store, unable to come up with a reason to explain what I was doing, wanting to say I was looking for my mom, but I was alone. Putting his cup to his lips, he looked at me and knew how long I'd watched him. But he smiled at me, moving with no more speed than before, and placing his roughed hand on my shoulder, spoke. "The line," he said, "moves in the other direction."
That deserves a little pause.
You know, it's funny, it makes me think of sometimes you notice people while you're going about your daily activity and you don't realize you're staring at them, you know, until they catch you, you know, and then you do all this overthinking of, oh, what they must be thinking, and the simple solution was you're standing in the wrong place. You know? You get lost in thought, noticing, you know, just subtleties and just being aware and in that moment, and then all of a sudden you're caught in that moment, you know, and it's kind of humorous.
Happens all the time to me.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things is people watching, and
Yes.
whether you're in a cafe or a bar or in a park or whatever, and just noticing what folks are doing. I think that's one of the best parts about poetry is just giving attention to mundane things, I suppose.
And you align,
yeah.
align a lot of what you see, nautical references, and it's true, and that must be very near and dear to your heart. You know, you're aligning all things that you notice with the sea.
Yeah, this particular cafe was in Seattle, and so I was very close to the Salish Sea, or also known as the Puget Sound, and so yeah, Camano Island is an island there in the Salish Sea, and you know, I think the presence of nature and stuff. I think that's one of the things I find myself resonating with Mary Oliver. Is that you know, nature sort of finds its way into the everyday for me.
Sure.
You know, Frank, well, one thing about writing your observations is you're safe at home alone and nobody's going to suddenly say, "What are you looking at?" But Frank, you really got me wondering what on earth made Frank decide to juxtapose those two prose poems. They have almost nothing in common. Mary Oliver's is rhetorical, it's in the second person, it's an exhortation, clear, simple message. Go for the rapids, take a chance on love, okay? And yours is, the line is third person, it's observation. They have so little in common except for one structural feature.
Yeah.
Got it?
Yeah.
The surprise ending. Right?
Right. Oh, that's the beauty. But also, what about the form?
So they don't pass your test? Okay.
Yeah. What about the form? The free flowing like the water over the dam. That's the structure of the poem in a sense. Where did that come from? Just spontaneously. But Bjorn, what about that cottonwood seed? You are a master of delicate detail, almost embroidery in your. But Victor, I got to answer your question. You're right. I mean, yay, Punch and Judy. I mean, you and I are just so contrasting in our appreciation. It's just marvelous. So could I retire? You're my man. You are. You won't move to Connecticut, as you say. Bjorn, can we interest you in moving to Connecticut? No, we've talked.
Yeah, Bjorn's got a few years ahead of him. He could handle the poetry show. So when your kids are grown and Frank and I are gone, you can move into his apartment and do the show.
Way to go. Oh, yeah. Bjorn, you are just a find. And thank you, Victor, for finding Bjorn. Or did Bjorn find you? And the same thing with Laurie. Did she find us or did we find her? I mean, as Mary Oliver says, wow, be open. But you're right, Victor. Surprise endings. We like them, don't we?
Whenever I'm working Frank's show, it always is a surprise ending. I am the surprise guest. But I'm open to it. You know? When you're open to the day, you never know where it leads you.
Right.
Take that road less traveled, and you might find yourself in some amazing places. I have a question for Bjorn. When did you start writing?
Well, pretty young, I guess. I remember in 6th grade in elementary school, I had to write a poem for a class, and somehow it got selected to be in a regional poetry publication with other kids' work. And mine was all about a hockey player named Trevor Linden, who played for the Vancouver Canucks at the time or around that time. And so I wrote about, I was a hockey player. I wrote about a breakaway, and that was kind of where it started. But I suppose I started writing poetry with more intention than as a practice, probably. Well, there's seasons to these things, and the last 10 years have been especially heavy with writing, but there's really not been a point at which I haven't been writing poetry in different kinds. It took me a while to recognize poetry as one of my primary kind of mediums. Writing in general has been really important to me my whole life, but writing with poetry has been something I found particularly satisfying probably the last 15 years or so.
That's interesting because I was a former New York City ELA teacher for 6th graders. So you know, we have in our curriculum taught poetry, and sometimes it resonates with some, sometimes not. But I've come across some wonderful writing from some of my students, former students, and often wondered how will this play out in their life 10 years from now, 5 years from now? You know, will they become writers? Will they become poets? And that's kind of encouraging to hear because I've seen and heard some real talent. And to hear that coming from you, it's almost like looking at a former student and flash forward, you see what their life has become. So that's kind of neat.
Yeah, that's cool. I think teachers are so important for introducing mediums like poetry.
Yeah.
You know, it's harder. It's not at the moment. It's not as celebrated. It's not as accessible as some other forms of art are, and so but it's so powerful. And I definitely remember poems by people like E.E. Cummings and
Yes.
others being kind of. Or the first time I read that line about not going gentle into the night, and how striking I found that language. And I've always been, interested in music, but
The hand
the
in hand.
musicality and the metaphor and the lyricism that comes through in poetry has always been powerful to me. The way just a few words can be so arresting is kind of magical, and getting to come up with a line, or to really have a line land in your mind and then honor it and give it attention and ask what it's trying to ask you or what it's trying to teach you is really something that was definitely planted by my English teachers, especially, growing up.
It's a fascinating process, and I'm really happy to see that that you have stuck with it and honed your craft. I think that's beautiful.
Thank you. And thank you for being a teacher.
Yeah.
I think if you read through the book, it really shows how your craft has developed. And I'd like you to remind us how your writing connects with what you do for a living.
Yeah, so, currently I'm program manager for a nonprofit organization called Nonviolent Peace Force. And we do violence interruption and transformation work around the world. We like to say we interrupt cycles of violence, and we enhance nonviolent responses to conflict. And poetry for me is a powerful way to evoke self-awareness, awareness of connection with self, with other, with the world, which is at the heart of a nonviolent practice. And so I utilize poetry in the work I do in community work. My doctorate is not in poetry. My doctorate is in community development, and it's the use of arts-based methods and the use of things like poetry and lyrics, from hip hop songs to country music to those stories that we hear in song form growing up, are often one of the entry points into poetry for the people I work with. And so whether I work in North Minneapolis here with doing intervention work with gang members day to day, or work in rural communities building early warning or early response systems around political violence, there's a real need for connecting to self and world and other that poetry allows us to do, and that allows me to deal with the grief and the pain and the suffering that we encounter in the world, and also all the beauty and joy and things that make life worth living. So yeah, poetry is an important part of my daily practice as a peace builder, and I, it's really the heart of what I would call my spiritual practice as well.
Wow.
That's such a healthy outlet.
Wow. Oh, man, you gave me shivers up the spine. We just had a request from Fairfield University for nominations for an honorary doctorate. I said, what about the peacemakers? Victor, yes, let us put our heads together as alums of 64 and suggest a peacemaker instead of the warmongering. Wow. Brilliant.
There's more of a budget for warmongering.
What's that?
There's more of a budget for warmongering.
That's it.
Big money in that. Big money in that.
Big money.
But there's more power in the peacemakers.
There's more
Yes.
power in the love and the peacemaker. Yeah. Thank you, Bjorn. That was such a encapsulated statement that is so powerful and so meaningful at such a deep level. Those vibes, too, from Mary Oliver. You know? Victor, you have had a really fruitful friendship with Bjorn. How long has this been?
Oh, we rarely talk to each other in person. He has a poetry circle at the same time I have choir practice, so we don't get together.
Oh.
We mostly do over media, which has been a pleasure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mainly saw Bjorn going because you notice he has a fine reading voice, and he's often been asked to do readings in front of the congregation on Sundays. So that's how I got to know him. And I thought, oh, those are good poems. Those are his. So I got him onto your show.
Amen.
So I'm a fan and a friend.
Oh, amen to that. So, Victor, what else in the book that struck you as an independent reader who appreciates the word? What are some of your favorite poems in the book?
I've been sort of focusing on poems on the bereavement theme. For instance, let me look at, well, that's not bereavement, is it? Reading Mary in Memoriam. Now, we don't have that in the, that's not included in the book, but should be included in some book.
Yeah.
And it's for Ingrid and Ginny. Those are members of our congregation. Ginny passed away, and there was a widely attended service. They were, Ingrid and Ginny were life partners. And I think I should ask Bjorn to read that one, if you're ready for it.
Yeah, I would love to. Reading Mary in Memoriam. Yeah. As Victor said, I was asked to read a Mary Oliver poem at the memorial service, and so this poem kind of came out later that day, and so this is in honor of Ingrid and Ginny. Just as it had, oh, and I should say, sorry, before I start, that this one's not yet published, and so it should be forthcoming, but it's not in that book, but it's on its way. Reading Mary in Memoriam. Just as it always had to be, this day is here. But we didn't always know the weather that would accompany us, who would already have left, outstayed the predictions, or held the space in which you now rest. I'm reading Mary Oliver in Memoriam. Asking questions of your life no longer feels fair, though they linger at the edges of this place. You know, many poets look down their noses at her, too direct, too simple, too well loved. But when I walked in with her under my arm, not a few said, "Oh, you can't go wrong with Mary Oliver." I suppose I didn't want to go wrong today. I want to be direct and simple. You were well loved. And I'll defend you to all the poets, and read you in Memoriam, and weep and beat my chest, and laugh with you about sugar-eating grasshoppers, and shudder at the wonders of what we've done with our one wild and precious life. And when I, too, leave this space, I'll carry you under my arm, and those who greet me will say, "Ah, you can't go wrong with that one." And on we'll go, direct, simple, well-loved.
Oh, what a knockout that is, Bjorn. You whacked it out of the park with that one. Victor, good man. Oh, I was so moved by that. Perfect time to take a break. We're going to have a 3-minute break. Oh, but that one is so touching. Oh, help me to remember to carry Mary Oliver under my arm too when my time comes. Wow. Break time. We'll be right back.
It was kind of the storm of the century, or the 500-year flood or storm that, by some estimates, over 15 inches of rain fell over a 3-day period on June 4th, 5th, and 6th, 1982.
What is pickleball? The sport that has captivated millions with its combination of tennis, badminton, and ping pong can be played 1-on-1 or 2-on-2.
Hi, thanks for joining me. This is September Selectmen's Update.
Hello everyone, Carl Fortuna here again with another monthly update.
Good morning everyone. Today's the Town Council regular meeting, Wednesday, October 4th, 2023 at 8 a.m., Town Hall Green Room.
Tom and Rick had a part of that.
One of the most common cons this time of year is the utility scam. A bad actor may call or text you claiming to be with the utility company and threaten to turn off your electricity, saying you haven't paid your bill. They may also try to steal your money and sensitive personal information through a fake home energy assessment. This ruse often includes a phony credit check, which requires you to hand over your banking information and even your social security number. They may claim they can save you money on your energy bills if you buy their discounted equipment, but all you'll get is a big credit card bill. Always check with your utility company before letting someone into your home. Even if they're wearing credentials, they may be fake. Also, utility companies won't call or text you out of the blue threatening to turn off the lights. And while they do energy assessments, you have to set them up ahead of time. They don't just send people knocking on doors. For more information on how to protect yourself, visit Better Business Bureau at bbb.org. And to report a scam, visit bbb.org/scam tracker.
Gentlemen, and Lori, now I can retire. You've hit a point of quality that to be devoutly wished, as Shakespeare said. So, geography, guys. Geography connects you, because you're living only a few miles apart, right?
Right, about 11 miles away.
Oh, cool. But Victor, and then Bjorn, what is it that geography does to you in the appreciation of this poetry? It sounds a little abstract, but let me get down to your neighborhood flatlands, you know, South Dakota, big place in my heart, 8 years there. I loved the way Bjorn described in a couple of his poems in this book, just the natural world around you, the undulations in the prairie. I'm dreaming of 40 years ago, of course, in a memory that's so special. And Victor, you've lived away from Connecticut for a long time, right?
I've been in the Midwest most of my life now. I went to Fairfield there in the east, and I went to Boston University. But otherwise, I've lived in Wisconsin, Iowa, and mostly in Minnesota since 1978. So, like a lot of Midwesterners, I'm a transplanted New Englander. Although I don't have a typical New England surname, or the more recent arrival. Yeah, I took to the open spaces. When I go back east, I'm sorry, but New England often seems cramped and crowded with confusing, winding roads. Pretty white congregational churches and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when driving around my hometown, I thought, oh, this is more like it. That's why I'm going through Farmington Flats, which is more like the Midwest.
I never heard of it called the Farmington Flats.
Well, yeah, you grew up in East Hartford, right? And I grew up in New Britain, so.
New Britain. Mr. Victor Urbanowitz, doctor.
Yep.
Aha, Dr. Urbanowitz. Yours were the professional and professorial type for me ever since we met in fall of 60.
Yes, though I spent very little of my life professoring, mostly trying to scratch a living out of writing computer documentation and making it accessible to innocent, bewildered users and programmers who need a lot of reference information.
Okay, so stretch for a minute. The poet in you. What is the poet in you like about the geographical description in Bjorn's poem? It's really nice the way Laurie recognized that Bjorn's abilities are so broad, you know, the sports married with the poet, the natural poet. Boy, I can say that for sure. You're really way up there, Bjorn, with Mary and the gifted ones about nature in the tradition of Robert Frost. But Laurie spotted that, and I thought, wow. So Victor, in a stretch, the poet in you, what is it about the contrast between the lands of the prairie and, as you described, Connecticut? My friend in Tucson calls it the swamp. So everybody.
It's like the contrast that we were originally talking about in the beginning of the two poems.
Oh, yes.
There's a contrast.
There's the contrast, which makes for life and zest and vividness. Bjorn, read us a couple of those passages, please, of geographic description, which you tenderly, lovingly recount in the words.
And find some quick.
Yeah. Well, I think I can connect what you're pointing to this poem called "The Sacred," and I guess one of the things that Mary Oliver has taught me is, with her attention especially to nature, but really to everything, is just how what we give attention to is really connected to our ideas of what is sacred or holy in this world. And so this poem is called "The Sacred." The sacred is what we call the moments where our mind, body, heart are brought into a single space, where our whole selves are available to the current, where veneration and vision meet in reverent presence to the mundane. A bite, a sip, a squeeze, a blessing. May you encounter today each magical moment.
Bravo, that's a Mary tradition, lovely.
sacred, or you could say the spiritual, is something when your whole being and experience are integrated, as he says, brought into a single mind, body, heart, brought into a single space.
Yeah.
It's almost like the ability to be present, to be in the moment, to experience everything that's happening
Yes.
around you. You know, sometimes, you know, especially during the pandemic, my husband and I would take a walk in the woods, and I looked at it like the trees above, the whispering pines. It had a almost religious and spiritual sense to it. It was a cathedral, if you will.
Amen.
And it was beautiful.
Oh.
And it was a very wonderful moment to stop, no matter what was going on in the world, to be present to what was happening around you. And it's the sound of silence is actually deafening.
Beautiful.
Yeah. You know, I have another poem I brought called The Sounds of Grief that maybe I'll read next. And to me, it really points to what you're saying, because so much of the world is calling out, I think, for our attention, and unless and until we give it full attention, it sort of keeps working on us. And so this poem, Sounds of Grief, kind of gets at that idea, which I think was and is a big part of the pandemic. And so this is called Sounds of Grief. This grief sets the singing bowls of past pain to an echoing vibration. That which rings may be stroked or struck. The thwack of stick on steel slaps the sad, but the circling of wood on brass moves the mournful through. We are more bereaved than we tuned at first tap. This wound, with its jagged shape and throbbing beat, has to be heard. Only then might its wave be received and new movement be birthed. And I guess for me, this connects to the conversation, because at least in my work, when we're dealing with people who have experienced tremendous loss or suffering, or who are marginalized within their everyday experience. Those of us listening sometimes are quick to want to move past it or move on. And it won't let us until and unless we've given it its full attention. And so for me, I think there's a connection between the way we pay attention to one another, the hearing we give, the full hearing we give to the grief and pain that people experience, and the ability for that grief and pain to be transformed and for some new moment to present itself.
It's a beautiful way of putting it. You know, with grief, there's no way around it. You can't go over it. You can't go under it. The only way through grief is through it. And everybody has their own time frames. And, you know, to say, well, you know, it's been 5 years, it's been 10 years, but to that person, it's still like yesterday. And until they can put that in their own unique, proper perspective, they need people to listen and to be present.
To be fully aware and present.
Fully present, yes.
Fully. I loved your musicality in this poem, Bjorn. The singing bowls, but the alliteration. It's so lyrical in songwriting almost. Well, you're a songwriter, musician, right? Oh, lyricist, you are, fully. But this poem sings in its music. And the craft of poetry is really what we love focusing in on too. And the devices that really make the poem larger than itself.
It's interesting too, the actual words written have a wave quality to them. I was noticing that upon the page. It had a wave quality, and grief is like a wave. It rolls in, it rolls out. So I love the way you tied all of that together.
Thank you.
And the image of a singing bowl, that's really apt. It also implies that one grief brings out the resonance of previous ones. It's very subtly but clearly worked in.
Right, right. This poem was, as I said, it's both a reflection of the work that I do and the practice that I see on a daily basis, but it's also inspired by a prominent peace builder named John Paul Lederach, whose work in the peace building field has been foundational for me and many, many others. But one of the things he's pointed out is that in many of our social spaces where we're working on things like ending conflict or war or violence, we often think in these very linear timescapes where we imagine that we should be able to move past something based on our distance from the moment it happened. And so you said 5 or 10 years, for instance, and even more. But when we think socially about things, and the way that we understand better and better now generational trauma, it can take generations for trauma and grief and bereavement to move through a community or through a population. And it moves in waves that each need their attention and that set off that resonance again and again. And so a lot of this is again reflective of that work, and that the thing I've learned, at least in my practice, is there's really no substitute for giving attention to that sound, that musicality, that song that needs to be sung. And often I find that fastest way to move through is to actually give a full hearing. And the longer you resist it, the longer you have to live sometimes in that discomfort. And it's not about moving to comfort, but it's also important to recognize just what's going on in people or in groups of people, and that what you hear in their story is as important as their ability to understand your attention is being given to them.
Important to be heard, yes.
And Victor, another of your favorite poems from this book.
Oh, I like quite a few of them. I haven't sorted them out yet, but you said which one reflects the, say, geography, the topography of Minnesota?
Yeah.
Well, the one just before Sounds of Grief in Lonesome Fields.
Yeah.
You really have to be out here to understand what lonesome fields are. So that answers your question.
Oh, I remember that. Oh, an emptiness endless in the vista across the prairie in South Dakota. West of the river, it's a little more rolly and hilly from Pierre onto Rapid City, but earlier there's just an ocean. That's the only descriptive I can use, because being all the time in my life on the Sound and looking out at the ocean with almost an not visible horizon line between the ocean and the atmosphere and the changes there, it was so similar to me. That's why I just loved the prairie, the flatness and the indistinguishable horizon line sometimes. And as I drove my parents across back in the 70s as a recent transplant to Pierre, South Dakota, we looked over and there was only one thing in the far, far distance in the middle of nowhere, and that was an outhouse, which my poor mother got locked into. Oh, such memories. Wow. Dreaming.
Go ahead.
Western Minnesota is similar to South Dakota, but South Dakota gets really unique. It's really its own kind of landscape, especially the slightly rolling hills with water at the bottom, and just a few trees where it's deep, and the wind doesn't destroy the trees. So it's definitely more of a plains environment. I'd say Minnesota has, I don't know quite the difference between, after all these years, between plains and prairies, except plains are just more desolate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We got 10 minutes, gents. I want to hear Bjorn's voice on some of his own poems, fully, that he loves and could almost recite without any visual. Yeah. Have you memorized any of your poems, Bjorn?
Well, I'm not very good at memorizing. I have some short-term memory disability challenges that make that hard for me, but there are lines from some of them that really stick out for me. And I'm thinking about the poem Victor mentioned, In Lonesome Fields. I'll read that one and maybe explore it a little with you. But in Lonesome Fields, I wake to meet my teachers in lonesome fields and on tired roads, with smiling faces and balled fists, who know my name and to whom I am anonymous. May I greet them each as sister. This poem, it definitely evokes that kind of openness of the landscape, and it for me is sort of an exploration of, I suppose, the frustrations and the difficulties of encountering the world, and trying to evoke in myself a practice of seeing those difficulties and those difficult people and situations as possible teachers, and that how I greet them is so important to my eventual encounter experiences with them. But the fields, those empty fields, and that sense of isolation, or that sense of lonely encounter, even in the midst of many people, that sense that so many of us have at times of feeling unknown despite being in proximity to so many people, and returning to a personal practice of finding the lesson or the wisdom that might be available to you in that difficult encounter.
Thank you. That is right up our alley of education, but also sensitivity. Victor and I are sharing a lot, and one thing we share is our age. And I think it's wonderful that Mary Oliver actually addressed that, since you've been so kind to her and so loving in your representation of Mary's gift to us, to all of us. I just tripped across one and made me think of Victor and me and the alums that we have as a kind of bonded group from Fairfield University 64. And it's our 60th, can you believe it? Going on September 29th. Victor, you're too far away, but I just talked to a couple of buddies in our little circle, and they're going to show I'd like your reflections, Bjorn, on what Mary's saying in this poem about her dad. And thanks, Lori, for reading this.
Oh, I guess I am.
I think so.
Okay.
Good old Mary reflecting on her dad, I think.
Mary Oliver, poem for my father's ghost. Now is my father, free of all binding fevers. Now is my father, traveling where there is no road. Finally, he could not lift a hand to cover his eyes. Now he climbs to the eye of a river. He strides through the Dakotas. He disappears into the mountains. And though he looks cold and hungry as any man at the end of a questing season, he is one of them now. He cannot be stopped. Now is my father, walking the wind, sniffing the deep Pacific that begins at the end of the world. Vanished from us utterly, now is my father circling the deepest forest, then turning into the last red campfire burning in the final hills, where chieftains, warriors, and heroes rise and make him welcome, recognizing under the shambles of his body a brother who has walked his 1,000 miles.
Thank you. The shambles of his body. I'm feeling it. Victor, how about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of feeling kind of shambly myself.
Oh, it's Manifest Destiny. Wasn't that fantastic? She took us through the Dakotas to the Pacific, and it was almost like, you know, looking at the Straits of Darien or whatever that was, to be wondering about the wonder of it all at the Pacific.
It makes me think that we're all only here temporarily.
Yeah.
And that once our costume is shed, we become part of everything.
Wow.
That's how I took it to mean. We become part of the mountains, the ocean, the prairie, all of it. And that's a powerful poem of hers.
And Bjorn, may I ask you your age?
Yeah, I'm 42.
42. Hopefully you have another 42 to go at least. This is wonderful. Oh, what are your thoughts?
Do we have time to talk about a little bit more about one of Bjorn's poems?
Oh, of course, go for it.
I'm looking at In Lonesome Fields, and all of his poems are quite individual, but this has one feature that constantly recurs, a phrase that jumps out and startles me.
Wow.
I wake to meet my teachers in lonesome fields and on tired roads with smiling faces and balled fists. So what kind of teachers have you experienced? And how many times have the fists hit you?
Yeah.
That was surprising. That's one of your surprising phrases. What? What's he saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it points, at least for me, to, I guess, an interpretive choice when with the bald-fisted people that I've met in my life. Not necessarily literal teachers, but those folks who would do violence or threaten it, or whose anxiety, I guess for me too, it's about that white-knuckled sense of anxiety and anger and fear that might make a person clench their fist. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned in encountering people who are experiencing great pain. And in our space, we talk a lot about that violence is a response to unmet needs. And so sometimes one of the moves that we can make when encountering folks who are threatening violence is to wonder about the unmet needs that they may be experiencing.
Wow.
And to consider what part we may play in helping their needs get met. So yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of ways that you could read that. And one of my favorite lessons from the contemporary poet Padre Gotuma, who's a dear favorite of mine, he really loves when a poem is open to interpretation and you can take it several ways. And so I personally like that as well. It maintains a bit of the mystery even in the midst of accessible poems, writing in an accessible manner, and yet not necessarily giving up on the ability for it to mystify you and offer you potential paths to walk down with it and get the interpretation perhaps that you're in need of, or the lesson from the teacher that you need that day.
Beautiful, Bjorn. That is really a wonderful note to end on. Thank you for the healing, which is projected clearly through your verse, but also for the last word, which is mystery. Laurie, thank you. That's the word, mystery. We started with it, be open to it, and now it's a beautiful bookend wrap. It is a wrap. We're going to take off on our ostrich camera in a minute, and it's just so great to levitate. Almost goes with the show, right? I'm about to diaphanize. I'm about to float.
There you go.
Oh.
If I'm gone tomorrow and you hear this song today, just remember there is love for you in every note I play. There's an echo in the canyon, a reflection on the sound. When I'm really looking, I can hear you